we really need to model after our kids a lot more. Adults are absolutely boring. Like the extent of what adults actually do in their life is really ridiculously boring. Um, think about like what it is that we actually do as adults. Most of us are sitting around. Most of us are maybe doing a little bit of work, and we like to sort of talk. Often there might be some gossiping that might happen, and then you do your little bit of work. Maybe you're working on a spreadsheet, or maybe if you're working in industry, um, you might be, I don't know, driving to an oil rig at this moment, right? And we do all these things that are incredibly boring. And why do we actually do these things that are incredibly boring? We think that this is the way that we should act, right? Everybody else, the reason why we don't do things that are interesting is because we're afraid of what everybody else is going to say and do about us. And we've all had these comments. Um, I remember being at a bar many years ago, and there was a song, I think it was AC/DC, that was playing, and I was just like, I was kind of rocking out, I was singing to it, right? I was like, this is pretty good. And then somebody made a very liable comment that was there, and I was like, and it stuck with me for years. This is like 20 years later. And I think about that every time I go about of doing something. I think about like, oh, what if somebody says something? I'm like, this is really dumb. This was some random person who's probably very likely a jerk, right? They actually said something, and then it sticks with me, and then we let all of these sort of moments dictate our life, right? We let all of these things that we can have a great deal, a lot more fun if we start pretending that we are kids. And how do actually kids do the things that they do? Um, they're, many of us sort of think like, oh, they're childish and all this kind of thing. Like, think about the brain chemistry that's going on, right? I'm not going to go, I don't know any of the details about how this is working, but if you watch kids, they have a lot of the same emotions, same sort of things that we go through, but there's some things that they're really, really oblivious to. And one of them is thinking about what other people are perceiving you to do. And especially when they're really, really young, they might just kind of, if they're a toddler, they might just kind of do what's called solo play. They just kind of work by themselves, they do their thing, and they're just playing around. Now, even that language, right? So they're oblivious to the world. So now, even that language, play, right? We transition from play to work when we become adults, right? Everything is playing or modeling after what adults are doing, and then once you become an adult, you're working. You're a real person. Um, and some of that, I think that has historic norms in terms of what we do. Once you become 10 years old, you go to work, right? Many, many years ago. You would go to, and I don't know what the exact age is, but it's somewhere around 10 years old, you would go off to work. And then you're considered an adult at that point, right? And for us, right, as the sort of country that we live in, the world that we live in, we actually do better. And that was a time where you have to do a lot of manual labor, right? And that's what work was. And now we live in a time where we need a lot more creative ideas. We're sort of thoughtful with things, and it's actually play. The traditional sense of play is a very, very important part of what we actually do in every day, right? How many of you actually shovel, right? Like use a shovel and dig. And those people that actually use a shovel and dig, they really do it very intermittently. It's a small group of people that are doing it on a regular basis, that are actually doing heavy, hard work. And most of us are talking. Most of us are sort of interacting in kind of playful sense. right? And the more that you play, the more that you can imagine things in different ways, the more creative that you actually are. I'm a big fan of the idea of play and thinking about how do we how do we construct our lives so that instead of it feeling like work, it feels like play. Because I remember when I was, very young, I would probably do still a lot of the same stuff and the same actions, but it felt very much like play. The time it felt like work when I was sitting down and maybe I was reading in the classroom, I had to keep my act together, and sort of settle down. And that stuff is really, really boring, right? The times that I forgot about what I was actually doing and I was excited about being there is when I was playing, whatever that play thing. For me, I was playing in my sandbox, right? And playing in that sandbox, man, that was still working. I was still moving things around. I was making like cities. I used to make like cities a long time ago, and every once in a while there'd be a cat poop in it. Um, and then you kind of like build around the cat poop, right? So you have to build these cities, and there would be all sorts of roads. It would be really cool, and then I couldn't wait to get back out to build those cities yet again. I would spend hours and hours and hours in a sandbox building these cities and roads and all these structures and all those kind of really cool things. And I would get my butt would be cold and wet, but I would just love to still be there. I couldn't draw, I couldn't move from building that stuff. I still remember that very vividly, and I was maybe 7 years old, right? And I want everybody to sort of feel work in that same sort of way, whatever that is. And that's where we have to remove some of the language and sort of things that we do and think about, like, how could we be more like children? How can we be more like kids in the sense that we get drawn into something and we just want to just have fun with that thing and it's a better experience, right? And then the other thing is, how do we ignore the outside world a little bit more and focus on just having a good time, right? Like the times when I've had the most fun is almost always when it's play, even at quote unquote work today, right? And I think about the moments where I enjoy my job. It's playing around with things, solving puzzles, doing things that are kind of perplexing, right? When I feel like work, that I'm going to be very honest with you, my job as a researcher or academic is to write, and it feels like work every time. It's painful. I don't like to do it, and it just plain old sucks. When I feel like it's play, and I feel like, hey, this is fun. I'm programming. Um, I am looking at data, for example, and sort of seeing things like that. I may be doing some sort of design thing. um, I might be talking, right? Some moments when I'm talking in my classroom, it's not always, it's not every class, it's not every year. There'll be moments where there'll be a good classroom, and the classroom is fun because I could talk to them, they respond back, we're getting it. It's kind of like a we're mutually sort of benefiting, right? And it's fun. It feels like play. I can sort of tease the classroom and call people out and just have, try to do things that are expanding everybody, um, and expanding how they're thinking about the world. And when it feels like that, it's fun, but and that feels like play to me. It feels like I'm just talking with friends, in a weird way, right? I'm normally a pretty quiet, reserved person. That's my natural tendency. That's how I grew up. Is a very, very quiet, reserved person. But in the classroom, um, I get to play it. When I'm in a classroom that feels fun, right? And I want to really stress that not every class feels like that. It does not is not always a good experience. But the ones that you feel a good experience, um, it's wonderful. It's a really fun thing, and it almost always feels like play, where we're just goofing around. And I want you to sort of stress that. How can you be a kid? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is exercise. Kids just want, they, they run around. They're just running around. They all got a whole bunch of excess exercise. And we as adults, we think that that is stupid, right? We do, right? Like talk to almost any adult or see how they behave and they're just standing around doing nothing, and our world can be solved simply by acknowledging that we can just play, do things that are playing around, running around, doing things. I cannot stand watching any professional sports or anything like that because I find it so boring. I want to get out there, right? And so I do. We're always moving as much as we can. My family is very moving, right? Like we're either doing quote unquote work, homework, or whatever, or we're walking, we're swimming, we're cycling, whatever. We're always doing something. Um, and it makes a really good experience for us as a family because we're just moving. And that's the way that um, I think play is so much like having that part of your life, the sort of moving around and doing things just makes your life enjoyable. Every time that I do that, yeah, the 5 minutes when you start always suck. You never want to do it. But then when you get into it, it's a good experience. And then after, you're euphoric, right? Almost every single time. And, it's good for us to actually do those things. I think it's really important to who we are as individuals to be more kid-like, be less adult and more kids. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.